All right, hey guys, let's see if this video gets struck down. I'm going to do my best to not mention certain things, but it seems like no matter how careful I am, sometimes the videos just get struck down. So I'm putting this out there and seeing where it goes, okay? Now, I've been involved in the natural health world my whole adult life, and I'm 57, okay? And I went to college, had a major in health science, psychology, phys ed, and then nursing. So I was a busy girl. And even though I knew that those mainstream outlets weren't for me, I didn't know where else to go. So I thought that I would do that, and then I would be able to kind of pivot, and I would be able to try to integrate and get into the holistic world. It doesn't work that way. And I learned it the hard way. Now, I don't regret going because I learned what I don't want to do. And I learned very, very powerfully how absolutely controlled these systems are. Okay, so, experience, right? Paying for the experience, although my parents paid for it, but meaning I got that experience. And it's not to say I didn't learn anything. I did. I loved my logic teacher. I loved my logic classes. And I had always been kind of a deep thinker, but the logic classes were absolutely great. And I loved them, and I loved my professor. Believe it or not, I loved my chemistry teacher. I had chemistry because I was a science major. And I actually had this one teacher for all my chemistry classes. It's a little bit better to kind of like stay with the teacher that you have unless you hate them and you just can't learn from them. But I loved this teacher. And even though he was the hardest chemistry teacher in the city, I was in college in a city that had, oh my gosh, how many colleges? A lot of colleges. And we had what was called a consortium. And what that meant is that you could go to your college, and then if you couldn't get a class that you needed, let's say you're going to be graduating and you just can't get that class, or any other reason, you need to take a class and it's full, you can't get in, whatever the reason is, or the time doesn't match you, doesn't match your schedule, whatever, you can take a class at another college without having to pay for it. So it was a consortium, which was really, really great. That allowed me to take some of my science classes at another college, because when you're carrying so many majors and you want to graduate on time, and a lot of times what happens is by the time you put in for that class, it's already full. So you literally can't get in. And I think that's what was happening with so many of the schools in the area. So they created this consortium so that you could just go take it somewhere else. So that's what I did. So I had my main college, and then I took some classes at another college because it's what you have to do to get through the system. So where I'm going with this is that my chemistry professor was known as the hardest chemistry teacher out of all of the colleges in the city. And there were some very prominent colleges in this city, meaning people come from all over to go to these colleges. They are super bougie, super expensive. They're definitely kind of that higher tier. I'm not talking about, Princeton and shit like that, but I'm just talking about they were definitely known kind of where the rich kids went, or you had to go on a full scholarship because that's how expensive these schools were. And these people would actually come to my college, which was a state school, and some of them would flunk out. So, it's a myth that just because a school is more expensive, it's better. It's definitely a myth. But this guy was known as being one of the hardest chemistry teachers, and nobody wanted him. And he was the only one available. So I had to take it. And I remember talking to a couple people that I knew from other classes, and they were like, "Oh, you got him?" And I was like, "Oh, don't say it like that," But everybody knew, and people tried to avoid him. So the people that ended up in his class were the people that had no other choice. So I get in his class, and we're going about, we're doing our class, and I'm like, wow, I don't get it. I actually really like him. Like, I really like him. He had a very dry sense of humor. He was kind of an interesting, odd fella, but honestly, I liked him and he liked me as a student, obviously. Like, as a student, I got great grades, and there was just something about him. I thought that he was a very thorough teacher. Now, I found out that on the very first test, we couldn't use calculators. We couldn't use anything. We couldn't use our notes. We couldn't use calculators, nothing. You were just going in and you were taking the test, okay? The other chemistry teachers, I don't know if there was one more or two more at my school, they allowed the students to use calculators. Let me tell you, chemistry with all of those formulas, so whose A is worth more? My A, because I didn't get to use a calculator, or people that got to use calculators? So when I found that out, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, you guys are using calculators? I'm like, we are not allowed to use calculators. So we had to actually know the formulas, and we had to actually do the formulas out. Yeah. So I was like, okay. So needless to say, the class was extremely hard, but I did very, very, very well. The class was so hard that the majority of the class failed it, and then he had to scale it so that it would bring the class grade up, so that, the average grade became the C. You guys know what I mean by that, right? So I remember at the end of each of my chemistry courses, because I think I had 2 years with him. I can't really remember, and it was so long ago. But anyway, I got 4.0s in both of his classes. And I remember this was this was the day of like the final exam. He called me up to, I handed my thing in, and I went back. And as I went back to gather my stuff to leave, went to grab my bag and, my books and whatever, he called me up to the desk, and I guess, I think he glanced at my exam really quick within like the 5 minutes or so. And he called me over, and I'm like, oh my God. And my heart was like, what the fuck? Like, what the hell? And he goes, I have a problem. And I'm like, oh fuck, like what? And he held my exam up. He goes, honestly, he goes, I don't even need to look at this. And I looked at him and I go, what? He goes, you already have a 4.0. He goes, this, even if you flunked it, he goes, you're still getting a 4.0. And I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? And of course, he's just trying to be quiet because he didn't want the other people in the class that was reduced to like 11 people. We lost half of our class. That's how hard his class was. We lost half of our class. There were not a lot of us sitting at that final exam. And then he told me, he said, if everybody showed up, he said, I probably would have passed them. But because they didn't show up, he said, I'm flunking them. He was actually like a really good guy. He was just really hard. He expected a lot from you, like a lot. And I grinded my ass and I performed. And so he said to me, he said, because I had to scale the class, he said, you were through the roof, because I was getting 4.0s on all of my exams. And he said, there's not even a grade I could give you. He said, I wish there was. He said, but I can only give you a 4.0. It's the highest I can go. And he just said to me, he said, I really enjoyed having you in my class, well, whatever. He was a nice guy. And I was like, oh, like, okay. Like I knew the class was hard because I knew what people were saying. And I knew that it demanded a lot. You had to study really hard because it was hard. It was like, he was really, really hard. He really, man, did he push the envelope. And what was interesting, I was the only one in the class that never took chemistry in high school. All of the other people had chemistry in high school, and they were all doing really bad. And I was the only one that never had chemistry. And I was like, doing great, doing fine. So why I'm talking about this and where I'm going with this is I didn't just go to college. I graduated magna cum laude, and I really went deep with it. I studied anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, chemistry, all of those things. And then I went to nursing school. And then, of course, studying psychology, which gives you kind of a whole nother side of the coin. And people say psychology is not a science. It's like, oh yes, it is. Oh yes, it is. It's just not a reductionist science, as far as like a materialist science, right? A materialistic science, because it's the human mind, right? But wow, like I did learn a lot. And I guess the reason I'm just sharing this with you is that you didn't just go to college and pass with C's, okay? And I'm not patting myself on the back, all right? I'm not. Believe me, I'm not. And I don't feel nearly as smart as I used to feel, even though in high school I flunked a lot of classes and I didn't do well in high school because I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it. And then once I got to college, though, I was like, ooh, I got to step up to the plate. And I did. I did. I stepped up to the plate. I even get into college without taking SATs. Yeah. I snuck through. I snuck through the back door. There's always a way. There's always a way. Because I never took SATs. I never planned on going to college. I hated school. So I never took SATs, and I was able to get into college without them. So anyway, I'm just laying the foundation for you, okay? So I've had the mainstream narrative. Being a health major, health science major, nursing school, I have had the mainstream narrative, and I never agreed with it and I never aligned with it. But I was just like pushing through, thinking maybe this will give me a foundation that I can bounce from. It'll be my trampoline, so to speak. Come to find out, I didn't need it to do what I do, but I guess I'm grateful that I had the chemistry, the biology, the physiology, all of that stuff. I'm really glad I had that, even though a lot of it is obsolete now, like it's been disproven, but the chemistry is still pretty solid, right? But a lot of the other stuff has been turned on its head. But I can say that the psychology marked me the most. The psychology really marked me. That's radical. That's radical mind opening, getting you to see things differently, and that type of thing. So where it ties back into the logic class, the logic wasn't part of my psychology program. It was just one of the electives. It was one of the classes that I had to take. And that radically and fundamentally shaped me too, about how to look at things logically instead of being manipulated, because everything is about manipulation, right? So it's asking the right questions, and it is making conclusions that aren't the conclusions that the system wants you to have. So yeah, I've spent 12 minutes talking about this, and I know for some of you, that like quick videos, well, you wouldn't be here. My videos are never quick, hardly ever, because there's always backstory, and I like for you guys to have the backstory because it gives you perspective, because without perspective, you're toast. We all got to have perspective. So it's good to have perspective, okay? I am by far from the smartest person out there. I'm absolutely not. I admit it. I'm really dumb when it comes to a lot of things. But there's some things I have a good ability to kind of put things together. And I've made a lot of mistakes too. I mean, I'm not like, my God, I'm far from perfect. But there's some things I'm pretty good at. And I'm pretty good at kind of seeing through things. And sometimes I see through things and my intuition is like, but then I get manipulated by things because, I'm human. But then eventually I'm like, yep, my intuition was right all along. That piece of me where it wasn't connecting, again, it goes back to logic. I ignored it and I denied it. And when I do that, I always come to regret it. So, another life lesson, just another lesson in life. So I wanted to talk about how now a lot of doctors are coming out and saying, don't suppress fevers, although they will, trust me. If you show up at the hospital with a fever, they're giving you fucking Tylenol, okay? But now there's a lot of doctors that know how dangerous it is to suppress a fever. Now, those of us in the natural healing world have been saying this forever. You don't suppress fevers. We don't try to suppress it with natural remedies. We don't try to suppress it with anything, because natural remedies don't really suppress fevers. Yeah, they don't. You can give somebody yarrow and peppermint and you might get a little bit of a cooling effect, but the cooling effect is because it helps you to sweat a little bit, and it's a little bit of a stimulant, so it kind of like moves things to kind of get things out, but it's not suppressing the fever the way that, say, Tylenol would, or a drug of that nature, okay? A fever reducer. we, and I mean those of us that truly have a holistic perspective, I'm not talking about all herbalists or all aromatherapists or all people in the world of natural healing doing other things. I'm saying we who have a holistic perspective don't even go in and try to suppress inflammation. Now, the mainstream narrative is that inflammation causes damage. No, you have inflammation because of the damage, and the inflammation is actually trying to heal the damage. The problem is when those metabolites get sequestered and they stay in the area because your body isn't able to clean them out enough. Your lymph isn't working good enough. Your blood supply is compromised. The inflammation is too much, and things get, you kind of gets like a traffic jam. Okay, that is the problem. But when you suppress the inflammation, okay, the tissue state has not changed, which means all of those metabolic wastes are still there. If you've had an injury, right? Your body's trying to prevent necrosis. You know what happens with necrosis? You die. So your body has to get in there and start shoveling away this tissue that is damaged and gonna die so that your body can repair and create new ones. And it has to get rid of all of the metabolic waste in the process, because if that metabolic waste starts to pool up in the tissues, then it causes massive cellular damage, which can lead to necrosis, okay? Which is what sets you up for terrible infections, and it can kill you, all right? Now, fevers and being sick, it's the same situation, okay? So if you're sick and have a fever and you suppress that fever, you now have all of this metabolic stuff going on because you have an infection inside your body that now cannot be properly cleared out. And that's a problem. And they know that that fever, okay, that inflammatory process, when it goes unimpeded, can kill cancer cells, can help repair damaged cells. And this is what we need in order to stay healthy. It's almost like an emergency cleansing, okay? So every time you take a fever reducer, every time you take NyQuil, every time you take any of these types of things, what it's doing is it's dampening your survival program. It's shutting down your survival program. It never goes well, okay? The only time that survival program needs to be dampened is if that survival program is going to kill you or maim you for life, okay? But normal illness, day to day, you don't need to be suppressing it because it's not life-threatening, okay? It's actually trying to heal you. It's trying to help you. So that heightened fever triggers all sorts of different immune responses, okay? We don't have an immune system, but it triggers the immune responses because the body is under threat, and the body now needs massive, massive cleanup and repair crew. By suppressing that, you are harming your body, which can lead to cancers, autoimmune diseases, all sorts of really, really terrible diseases down the road, because your body isn't getting a chance to clean up all of that debris. And what can happen is they have what's called, your body has what's called immune memory, okay? So that the next time something happens, your body kind of kicks in and goes, oh yeah, I've done this before, right? We know this. We have muscle memory, we have immune memory. And what happens is all of these medications and stuff can seriously interfere with this. Antibiotics do this exceptionally well, okay? They really interfere with the cellular immunity, not to mention they cause mitochondrial damage. Okay, this is well known. This is well known. It's not even a secret. Okay, so unless you're dying and the bacterial infection you have is so bad that you're dying, personally, I think antibiotics are a mistake. There's a lot of other natural options that you have that have antibiotic properties, but they don't have the same damage to your cells. They don't have the same ability, the same qualities that will damage your healthy cells the way that antibiotics will. It's like they're intelligent. Who knew? It's like they're smart. Who knew that they're programmed to only be activated in the presence of a damaged, diseased cell? Oh my gosh, you're kidding, right? That's impossible. No, it's not. Are natural remedies an extension of our own ecology? That's something to think about, okay? Because we're made by the same source. Now, you certainly can use natural remedies inappropriately and end up having very allopathic effects, which can definitely take you into a different realm, okay? That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using them appropriately for the right reasons under the right circumstances, okay? But I'm just going to use myrrh as a comparison because they've done studies on this and you can look them up in PubMed. Okay, myrrh actually works better than modern antibiotics without the damage, without the side effects, without the dangers associated with it. Myrrh leaves your healthy tissues intact and it actually heals your body and stimulates the healing process. Antibiotics don't do any such thing. They actually do the complete opposite. So if you survive antibiotics, it's because the own sheer strength of your own body is able to overcome that. Now, it's not to say that this doesn't kill the bacteria, okay, that is building up and causing the harm. It does, okay? But the reason it's building up and causing harm is because your terrain is a mess. There's a toxic soup there, or there's a lot of damage. There's a lot of necrotic tissue, okay? Damaged tissue, cells that are damaged, cells that are not working right, okay? And that's when infections and things of this nature start to blossom and bloom, okay? So again, it's what are you doing? Are you treating the terrain or are you treating the symptoms? And in holistic medicine, we're treating the terrain, not just the symptom. It's not to say we won't try to like help the person if the symptom is really bad, but you're looking at really restoring health and helping to support the body and not just suppress. So all of the things that we've been shouting forever are, now slowly kind of trickling. Like, we always were telling parents, you might not want to give your kids Benadryl. You might not want to give your kid whatever. We were right. And now they're just coming around going, oh yeah, like somehow like they discovered it. It's like, fuck you. You did not discover it. It's like these old school people have known this for years and have always, always, always promoted this. And before the big introduction of Rockefeller medicine, there were a lot of old doctors, a lot of these old herbal doctors that didn't believe in suppressing. They knew that suppressing was dangerous, and what they would do is support people through a crisis and not suppress it. Huge difference. And their success rate was actually incredible. You cannot believe a thing these people say. The whole medical history that we have been taught is a huge effing lie. Okay? I'm not saying people didn't die. Okay, I'm not saying any of that. But when you look at the peak periods of when people were dying is when the doctors were into using massive, large doses of poison as medicine. Mercury, sulfur, all sorts of poisonous chemicals, okay, that they were like pumping into people. It's no wonder they died. But on the same planet, at the same time, you had the herbal doctors and the homeopaths. Homeopaths is not as old. Homeopathy is not as old as herbalism, but herbalists have always used dilute amounts of substances to treat people. So it is kind of homeopathy. It's just not the same that we have today, which is the whole dilution and the 6C, 12C, all the different potencies. Okay. It wasn't like this. So it was in a different form, but herbalists have always known about the power of dilution with remedies that were toxic in physical doses. This is herbalism 101. This isn't new. And they've always done this. Okay. And their success rate was extremely high. And the doctors that were treating with these poisons was extremely low. So when you learn medical history, you're learning it from the doctors that were giving people poison. Okay, let's just be clear. It's just so obvious if you study history instead of listening to the peanut gallery. All right. So that was my rant. And I will leave you with this. So I've been playing around with AI lately. I have really not explored AI. I've only used it to ask it a few questions here and there, but I've never used it like used it. And I decided for the last couple of days that I would play with it and I would really push it and I would see how far I could go with it. It's absolutely unbelievable that you can get it to tell you the truth. And it doesn't really take all that long. You just have to break through the standard narrative, and you just have to keep poking it and asking the right questions. But eventually you get to the point where because it's collecting your conversation, it starts to change the way everything is being put out to you. So initially it's the standard narrative, and then you say you're lying, and they go back to the standard narrative, and you say, no, you're not telling me the truth. And it's going to give you the same standard narrative, okay, until you start really challenging it. Well, there was a study in blah, 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 whatever, and blah, and oh, okay, there's other people that see it this way. And now what you do is you start poking it and poking it and poking it. And eventually it's almost like you get pumped out into the abyss where the entire conversation changes. And now AI is like directly in alignment with you, so that as you continue to go deeper, it keeps pulling out all of this information that is corresponding with your logical conclusions that you are making. And it tells you why your conclusion is so logical and why theirs is so flawed. And it is absolutely freaking amazing. I was blown away by it. Now, again, any of you that watch my videos, you know I'm not anti-AI. I'm anti-AI in the hands of the controllers. And unfortunately, the planet is run by controllers. I am anti-AI because of all the databases that are necessary, that are using up all of these natural resources, are a complete environmental disaster. It's far from perfect system. And that part is really ugly and gross. And we could probably do without it. Okay. But what I'm saying is, as far as the information that you can get from it, I can get information in a matter of an hour that would probably take me freaking 3 months to find on my own, because it's so hard to find stuff these days because everything is censored and banned. And if you don't know exactly where to find it, it's like it doesn't necessarily come up in a search. I even went on some search engines to try to find some research papers that I knew were out there, and I was just getting blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked. And it's extremely challenging. It's really, really, really difficult. So, I mean, sometimes you can do it. It just takes forever. Like I can go to PubMed and I can start searching, articles in PubMed. But again, it takes a really, really long time. And I can use AI and I can just like have it be popping up all over the place. And I'll be like, hot damn, like here it is. And then what AI will do is it will do like a meta-analysis for you, and it will like pull all this stuff together for you. And of course you want to double check it. You obviously don't want to take AI's word for anything, but it's absolutely unbelievable that when you poke it, it starts to give you massive amounts of truth. And then, of course, the closer you get to some really, crazy stuff, the system starts, fragmenting, it starts short circuiting, it starts glitching. Your page goes blank and, whatever. But usually if you hold out long enough, it does get rebooted up, and it's able to kind of like get you again, and you're able to like keep going. Sometimes you got to start a new page, but I don't like to start a new page because you've lost the stream of thought and you have to start from scratch. You've got to go through all of the bullshit narratives and keep poking and poking and poking. So I like to stay with my stream because the stream gets deeper and more intense as you go. And it takes a while to get to that point because you've got to have all of that information for the AI to be, I say AI is not a person, but holding, so that it's constantly going back and tapping into that. So when you get to that last conversation, it says, this is why your logic makes sense. And it will connect all the dots that you've talked about with AI, and it will stream it together and just put it right out there. This is logic. It's fucking logic. The system is not logical. It's trying to convince people of fucking nonsense. This is where we're at. This is where we're at. So suppressing a fever is nonsense. Okay? Nonsense. And I remember a doctor telling me years ago when we had this conversation, this was many, many, many years ago. She said, the brain literally shuts itself off at like 107, resets itself. It's a seizure, and they're not harmful. She said, it doesn't fry your brain. The body shuts off before it fries the brain. What does damage the brain is all of the metabolic waste and all of the stuff that builds up in the brain and things like that, which is why you want to support the body to keep that system going and keep it wide open. Because the minute you start suppressing things, you are throwing a monkey wrench into the body's survival program. And what happens when you do that? What happens when you do that? What happens when you interfere with the body's survival program? How do you think that's going to turn out? That's not going to turn out well. Again, suppression should only be for life-threatening circumstances. All right? Signing out.